why some of them are not so good as well. So first thing, this is not a camera to take birds with. Okay, despite me seeing people like this at the reserve, please don't try and take pictures with this. It's fine for selfies, but not for birds. And by the way, selfie sticks scare birds, so please don't put it on a stick and let's put it out. Okay. So the first question is, when you're taking pictures of birds, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to take a picture to say, I saw the bird? Lots of people do that. There's nothing wrong with it. Some of them don't even care it's in focus. They just want to know what that bird was so they can go look in a book and compare it. And that's fine. Other people want to be a bit better and actually have photos to show off with. And by the way, most bird photographers are show-offs, if you've not worked that out already. So they'll buy a little bit better equipment, they'll learn a little bit more, and they'll explain that in a minute. And then, finally, last but not least, there are those who want to win competitions. And if anybody thinks bird photography is a nice, gentle, calm hobby, go to a competition and I'll tell you they're willing to kill each other to win. So, what do you need? Well, it all depends primarily how much do you want to spend. And it really does come down to that. You can get decent pictures with a basic point and shoot. If you look at some of the point and shoots today, they have a 40 times zoom, which is probably better than most professional cameras. You can get half decent pictures. You don't need to go and spend thousands of dollars. For $300-400, you can get a camera that will take decent pictures. You might want to go a little bit higher. People call these prosumer cameras. They have a little bit of a better lens. They work better in lower light. And then we get into the budget in the mid-range. So now we're looking at spending something between $700 and $1,500 on a camera. And then we get into the big boy stuff. You're into the $3,000 to $7,000 range for these cameras. And my advice is, by the way, if you're buying a single lens reflex, an SLR, where the lens is separate to the camera, spend the money on the lens. I see lots of people who have a $7,000 camera and have a $300 lens on it and wonder why the pictures are not very good. If you have a $300 camera and a $7,000 lens, I guarantee you'll get much better pictures. Cameras come and go. It's like a computer every 3-4 years. Lenses are forever. And it is an investment of a lifetime. And I can tell you, I bought a lens 10 years ago, sold it last week, and actually got more money than I paid for it. So they hold their value very well. And just to see, what we're talking about, this is my small lens. Okay, this is not the big one. So you can get into serious money. But as I say, you don't need that. So what does your camera need to do? Well, there are a few things it has to do. So autofocus is a prime necessity. Anybody who's tried to take birds with manual focus, if you're shooting herons that stand very still for a very long length of time, you'll get a decent shot. You try to take pictures like those on the right, which is a Blackburnian warbler and a mourning warbler, no chance with manual focus. So you need to have autofocus. You need to have automatic exposure. You do not have time with birds to mess around trying to change the exposure. Sometimes you can preempt it, but you really need auto exposure, but you need the ability to change it. Okay, so everyone understands what I mean by exposure, right? The amount, how you compensate for the light. You need auto white balance, so trying to change from a sunny day to a cloudy day on the fly when you're taking pictures of birds is very difficult indeed. You want the viewfinder to show you 100% of what you're looking at. So most people don't know this, but most viewfinders are not 100%. Even on a decent camera like this, they're only 98%. Some of the point and shoots and the prosumers are only 90%. So what you think's a good picture in the viewfinder actually isn't when you come to print it out. And obviously you want the camera to fire quickly. So shutter lag, the time from pressing the button to the camera actually firing. I watched someone with a very old point and shoot the other day, and they pressed the button and waited, and by the time it fired, the bird had gone and had a meal. So you really need to have, press the button, it needs to fire. If we talk about lenses now, as much magnification as you can afford. Okay, this, believe it or not, is only about 8 times magnification. The big 600mm and 800mm lenses are 12 times or 16 times. That doesn't sound very much when you hear that prosumer cameras, some of them have 40 times magnification, and the difference is the quality of the picture. So you can get high magnification, but the quality won't be very good. With stuff like this, this lens runs about $6,000. If you get into the big 800mm lenses, you're looking at $12,000, $13,000 for a lens like that. Just as an aside, I had to buy my wife a kitchen to buy that. And you can ask her, she's just outside. She doesn't know I bought her a kitchen to buy the lens. Okay. So let's talk a bit about shutter speed and what's called aperture. So shutter speed is obviously when you press the button, how quick does it take the picture? And typically we'd be something from 1/15th of a second all the way to 1/8,000th of a second on a professional camera. Obviously with birds, generally faster is better. So the less fraction of a second, the better you are, because you don't want the bird to move, and birds move very quickly. But it's a balance between shutter speed and aperture. So what is aperture? Aperture is the amount of light that the camera lets in. Used to be to the film, obviously these days it's to the sensor. Okay? So it works backwards. The most light is let in at f2.8, which is about as fast as most bird lenses at least go. So a fast lens would be at f2.8, a slow lens is at f11 or f16. So the lower the number, the more the light, the faster the shutter speed will be. Does that make sense? So, if we just animate this a little bit, so from f4 is half the light of f2.8. f5.6 is half the light of f4. f8 is half the light of f5.6, and so on and so on. If we put shutter speeds now in, if I say f8, I get a shutter speed of 1/250th of a second. If I let in twice as much light, I can shoot twice as fast. Okay? So f8 1/250 is exactly the same as f5.6 1/500. Make sense? And the same as f11 1/125th. And so on and so on. So you can fill this in. So you can see f8 and 1/2000th of a second is actually the same as f5.6 and 1/500. Likewise. And so on and so on. So anybody know what this bird is down there? This is a Texas speciality. This is a black-capped vireo. Anybody who wants to see, the best place I know is Junction in West Texas. There's a place called Easter Pageant Hill. They reenact the crucifixion on the hill. Other than that, nobody's ever there. It is absolutely the best place to find this bird. So, in bird photography, this is typically what we use. We don't get to the F-13s and F-16s. So, exposure is the amount of light that the sensor is exposed to as determined by the shutter speed and the f-stop. That's the aperture. So aperture is typically called f-stop. ISO is the sensor, the sensitivity to light. It used to be film. So if anybody remembers Kodachrome 100, 100 was 100 ISO. ISO, by the way, is International Standard of Optics. So, if the now, we've said the light, the shutter speed and the aperture control light, but the other thing you can do is make the film or the sensor more sensitive or less sensitive. Okay, so 200, an ISO of 200 is twice as sensitive as an ISO of 100. Does that make sense? So, if we take this and say this is ISO 200, that's what my camera is set at. If I now change the ISO to ISO 400, you will see for the same aperture, the shutter speed has doubled. Okay? So, Sandy, how often do you take pictures at ISO 200 and 400? Never, right?
Hardly ever. 1600 in like shaded area.
Bird photographers today are up in the 800, 1600, 3200, and if it's nearly dark, 6400 type numbers now. So why are professional cameras more expensive than the point and shoot? That's one of the big reasons, is the light capability. You'll find these cameras can shoot at much darker, much worse light and get better pictures. Okay. The other that's me, by the way, in Costa Rica. The other thing that's important is something called depth of field. So if I just back here, depth of field is how much of the distance is in focus. Okay, so if I'm shooting something at 20 feet and I focus dead on 20 feet, it might be 19.5 feet to 20.5 feet is in focus and everything else is out of focus. So there's a front focus and a back focus. What you'll find is when you're at f2.8, f3.5, that is very narrow. And by narrow I mean 0.1 of an inch. Okay? Even at f8, f9, f16, it's still only 3 or 4 feet, depending on how far the subject is away. So, if you're shooting a bird, it's very common for me to trash pictures that have the beak in focus and the eye is out of focus. And on hummingbirds, we're talking, but it's very common. What this table gives you is, you can see I've oranged a block here. At 18 feet, and this is my lens here, 600mm, at 18 feet, at f5.6, the front focus is 18 feet, and the back focus is 18.1. So I have 1 inch of focus. Okay? So imagine if the bird's side on, that's fantastic. If he happens to be head on, now I've got to decide which bit I want in focus, right? And I'll tell you, if you think it's a decision, you're wrong. It's pure luck, usually, 9 times out of 10. Does everyone understand that? Because that will get you your better pictures than anything else if you understand that. Okay. Oh, wrong mic. So, just a couple of adjusts for the light is called metering. And almost all cameras have 4 different types of metering at least. You can see average metering, where it just takes the frame and says, I'm going to average for the light. What's called center-weighted average, where it takes all the light, but it actually weights the center part. And if you meet some trusty old photographers who are still using film, I guarantee that they're in center-weighted average, because nearly everybody shot that way 20 years ago. Today, most bird photographers either use what's called evaluated metering or spot metering. So evaluated takes the frame, it divides it, in Canon's case, to 64 squares. It evaluates every square and it combines them together to give you the best metering it can. Okay? I use that about 90% of the time. The other 10% I use what's called spot metering, where it only looks at the centre, 12% of the frame. You would use spot metering if you had a very dark bird on a very light background or vice versa. Because if you've got a very small dark bird and a bright sky, or if you use evaluative, it'll just be a silhouette. You'll just get a silhouette. You need to get some colour in, you would use spot metering. Okay. So, even though these are very good, they're perfect. So we have the ability to change the exposure manually as well. I'm not going to run through all of them, but you can see if you're shooting dark on dark, you would underexpose it. Everybody thinks because it's dark you should overexpose it, and you shouldn't. You should actually underexpose it. If it's mid-tone on mid-tone or mid-tone on light, auto exposure. Light on light, typically you overexpose. I put some rules of thumb in there. Honestly, if you took that slide and copied it, it would work, it would help you, but it's trial and error. You've really got to understand it for yourself. Okay, so American Red Star, I put this up. This is a very, very dark bird on a dark background. You can see on this picture, you can actually see the eye in the black. That's because it's underexposed. If I'd have exposed that perfectly, that would have just been one black blob on his head. You wouldn't have actually seen the eye. And this is a hook-billed kite. Here you can see the sky is very bright. I've actually spot metered this that we talked about earlier, and you can see that's still not perfect. It's still a little bit dark. If all else fails, Photoshop helps. I would tell you, people who say to me, well, it doesn't matter if it's a good picture because I can fix it in Photoshop, that is the biggest lot of BS I've ever heard in my life. Photoshop helps. It doesn't turn a crappy picture into a good one. Despite people spending hours and hours and hours trying to do it. I'd rather be out taking pictures than in front of a computer. Okay, so let's talk about birds now. So here's a ruby-throated hummingbird. Where do you think the focus point should be?
On the eye.
Yeah, on the eye or just behind it. The reason being, human beings, when they see a photo of anything that has an eye on it, are drawn to look at it. So, you know when you pick up a baby and we go goo goo gaga or whatever, you look at their eyes, and that's why their eyes are so big, by the way, to elicit that response. Birds, if you want the picture in focus, on the eye or just behind it. So there. Anybody's tried to shoot a hummingbird and tried to get the focal point just behind the eye, you're a better photographer than me. I'm happy if I've got a hummingbird in the front, let alone the eye. But that is really the ideal place to put the focal point. And it's obviously relatively easy with birds like this. This is a mixed bittern, he's obviously having a bad hair day there. But the focal point is just directly behind the eye. He didn't move for 5 minutes, so I had a lot of time to put the focal point just behind the eye. This one, not so easy. This is a female of the bird we saw earlier, American Red Star. She decided she wasn't very happy with me, so she started squawking at me. I would love to tell you I put the focal point behind the eye, and I did actually, but I can't profess to say I did it deliberately. This bird is super quick. If anybody's ever tried to take a picture of an American Red Star, it's one of the fastest moving birds around. Okay, so now let's talk about light. So this is a golden-fronted woodpecker. It's a very close relative of the red-bellied woodpecker that you'll hear calling around here. If you go 100, 150 miles south, red-bellieds give way to this species. You can see here, this is a good picture because the light is directly behind me. So if in doubt, if your shadow is pointing at the bird, you will 9 times out of 10 get a good picture. Okay? If your shadow is pointing away from the bird, number one, don't look at the sun or you're going to blind yourself. But number two, you'll probably get a silhouette. Here's another one where the light is perfect. This is a Saints Phoebe. I love this picture just purely because he showed me his underwing in perfect light. This is from Paul Rushing Park in Houston, if anybody. So, pretty rare here, but I just like that one because of the light. Light always doesn't have to be full frontal. This is a Nelson sparrow. Obviously the light's coming from the left here. This was taken just down the road, by the way, in Surfside. So if anybody knows Surfside, there's a marsh, Crab Road, just behind. In the winter, it's the best place I know to take this species. And the reason is they actually will only habitat this special grass, cordless grass. But yeah, you'll see me down there in the winter and it's usually this species I'm chasing. But as you can see, he gave me a nice gymnastic pose here, and then the light from the left. And this is the opposite here, the light's coming from the right. This is an American kestrel. I like this picture because the barbed wire is very unique. This is in Quintana, just by Freeport, LNG.
I know that wire.
I think every photographer down here knows that wire. It is really very attractive to bird photographers. Okay, so let's talk about composition, should I say. Action helps. Everybody likes pictures of birds doing something. This is a pileated woodpecker with its chicks. I have to tell you, the day after I took this photo, the tree fell over and the snake set the chicks. So, sorry to upset you. Sorry. But this was at Bradloff Bend. You know, the chicks are obviously very photogenic. But there are a few other things that help. Here's a chestnut-sided warbler eating a caterpillar. I have to tell you, that was about 18 feet away, as close as I could take a picture. I have about 50 pictures where he's head on, and the caterpillar's in focus and the bird isn't, because he's so close. So I was actually waiting for him to turn sideways. And this is a blue-grey gnatcatcher, winter visitor. You'll see plenty of these around. The reason I like this picture, by the way, is if you can see him pulling on the bit of spider's web here at the top. This is a male, by the way, because he has this black eyebrow just there. That's actually one of my favourite pictures. But you can see again, look at his eye, it's in focus. Look at his tail, it's completely out of focus. That's about that far.
So what do you think your aperture was set
at? This is f8. And it's f8 because I can't go any less with my big lens and the converter on. f8 is as fast as I can get. People have different styles. I'm a whites of the eyes kind of photographer. I like to see the bird and nothing but the bird. Other people like to show the tree and the environment. And I just want to see the bird.
I do too. I like that.
This is a bittern, American bittern. I put this in just to show you alligators don't have it all the wrong way. baby alligator it's eating. And you'd be surprised, it's a lot more common than people think it is. If you go to Brazos, then I guarantee I see some sort of heron or bittern eating an alligator at least once a year.
Where's the mom?
The mom was very close, and the bittern flew immediately after and took this picture. Okay, so let's talk about something else. There is something photographers talk about called the rule of thirds. Okay, so by the way, that is a Swenson's warbler, native to East Texas. Anybody goes up to the Turkey Creek Preserve, the piney lands, piney woods, you'll see this species. Very, very shy except when it's singing, just like that. So what is the rule of thirds? The rule of thirds splits your frame into this grid pattern. And what it says is human beings are drawn to the 4 places where the lines cross. Okay, so you'll see a lot of photographers will try and place the eye or something of note on where those crosses, where those lines intersect on the crosses. I see people slavishly do it and they get some weird photos as far as I'm concerned. But it is true that human beings don't like things to be absolutely centre. Off centre is sometimes better. Anybody tell me what's wrong with this photo? It would be much better if the bird was slightly smaller and I moved it to the right of the frame. Here, he's singing out of the picture. If he was singing into the picture, it's much more visually attractive. As I said, I'm a whites of the eyes guy, so I want it to be as close as possible. But you'll see people talk about it singing into the picture or flying into the picture. If it's on the outer edge and singing out of the picture, it's not so attractive. So, here we go, singing into the picture. This is a prairie warbler. It's a common migrant relatively through here. You want to see it breeding, you don't have to go very far. If you go to Jasper in East Texas, north of Beaumont, you'll find this bird breeding. It is an absolutely slavish singer. So if you ever want to see a bird singing, this is the bird to go get, because it sings day and night. This is a magnolia warbler, so this was taken at Quintana just down the road. Again, you can see you've got a bit of natural framing here and the bird's looking into the picture. It's quite strange when you look at how much of the picture is just green, but it works because the bird's looking into the picture. And again, here's a black and white warbler. The reason this is interesting is people tend to look at the branch and the branch leads you to the bird. So you'll see people, particularly people who take pictures of roads or fence lines, they'll actually use them to draw you into the picture. The same is true of birds and branches that come in and out of the frame. So let's talk about natural framing now. So this is, anybody know what this is, by the way?
Grasshopper?
Nice one. Lacan. It's a Lacan sparrow.
Oh, Lacans.
This was taken at Atwater Prairie Chicken Preserve by Eagle Lake. You can see here the reed gives it a real natural framing that adds to the picture. This is a Cape May warbler. I've broken the rule here. He's not in the rule of thirds, but he's got some nice foliage around him, framing him. Some baby great horned owls that were very nicely framed by the tree. I will tell you they all survived. Nothing else. They are one of the most photogenic baby birds you'll ever see. I think I took about 4,000 shots of this in one day. It was really interesting, I have to say.
Aw.
This is a blue-headed vireo, winter visitor, very common. This was actually published, and I think the reason it was published is because of this frame around it. It really brings out the bird, it's very black and white, the frame, the bird's colour, but it's almost ringed by the trees there. And last but not least, this is a seaside sparrow, very common here. You'll find actually the subspecies in this part of Texas is different to this one. This one was taken at Searim State Park, which is just by Beaumont. In fact, if you drive through the Valero processing plant, you get to it. It's a very neat place, but again, it's got the sort of natural framing of the dandelion there. And last but not least, this is a Chuck Will's widow, which is a big nighthawk. This was shot at Quintana, just down the road. And again, you can see the branch coming right to left draws you into the bird. You'd laugh, but I stood on a table, on a chair, with my tripod as big as it could to get this, because there was a hedge in the way, and immediately after this I ended in a heap with the lens on top of it. So I advise not to do that, even though it's a great picture.
Wow.
And the lens repair cost me $1,000.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so let's talk about small stuff now, and we'll get to hummers in a minute. Here's anybody know what this is? White-throated sparrow, pretty common. We said, you've got controlled by three things: the focal length, the aperture, the proximity to how far you go. What you'll find is, suddenly decided to stop working. There is a part that's in focus, i.e. his head in this case. There is what's called the zone of confusion. So if you put the bird's eye, or what you're actually in focus in that zone, you'll look at it and you'll go, there's something not quite right. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's because it's very slightly out of focus. If you're in the pink area, I'm afraid you're lost. It's out of focus. And the same is true for almost every picture you take. So, small birds, this is a cerulean warbler, probably my favourite bird. You can see here, it's mainly all in focus, and the reason is it's side on to me. If it was head on, it'd be a different story. Same again, this is a bay-breasted warbler, again at Quintana. If anybody wants to see migrants, I'll photograph migrants.